Joel, we got the live folks joining in, but I am curious, how is it out in Salt Lake City?
It's good. So we're just north of Salt Lake City, and if you, I don't know if it made any of the news elsewhere, but we had what we're calling the wind apocalypse. So
Gotcha.
this year we went home, and 3 days later had earthquakes, which were pretty unsettling, and then
Oh,
got
geez.
used to the environment and started opening a few things up and had the wind apocalypse and I think 110 plus mile an hour winds in
Oh my
Utah,
God,
which is very, very rare.
my goodness.
Yeah.
I saw that in Des Moines, or I guess out in Cedar Rapids. Similar patterns. Well, how about this? Let's kick off, and then we'll get back into it. So,
Perfect.
everybody, Jim Benton, CEO of Chorus. Thanks for joining us for the weekly briefing. Today, we're focused on selling to the C-suite, and I've got Joel Rackham, SVP and Global Head of Direct Sales at MarketStar, out in Salt Lake City. Joel, how you doing?
Very good. Yeah.
We were just talking about the wind apocalypse out in Salt Lake City. A lot going on everywhere right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think everybody's facing some unique new normal. I think if you say that now, it's almost like a curse word, but
yeah, we've gotten used to it. Well, I'm excited to spend time with you today, especially on this topic. I know MarketStar, you've got a very large sales force, 900 plus sellers, a lot of challenge during this time of people moving around. But in the spirit of selling to the C-suite, I wanted to kick it off and ask you about just a personal experience you've had early in your career. What was that first sales deal when you sort of had that aha as you sold to the C-suite?
yeah, I'm sure that the executive that got this email, if you were listening right now, would have a little bit of a chuckle. But I remember my first deal. I won my first deal, and I was so excited to get this deal. It was actually into HP, and that poor executive, I think from 8 p.m. to midnight, had no less than 6 emails and 4 retractions. So the following morning, I realized that none of those emails really retracted from his inbox. They just kept sending him more emails, and I don't know if it got me the deal, but it certainly got a good laugh out of the individual and made him realize I was very junior and but very human as well.
And it sounds like you got the deal.
Yes, we got the deal. So
I remember the old days, that retraction, you thought it did something and it did the opposite, essentially.
yeah, just
Yeah.
made matters worse.
Always made matters worse. Well, speaking of the C-suite, one of the key stats that we were looking at this week is that we've seen an 80% increase in just overall executive C-suite being involved in the sales process since January, February. I'm curious, you've got 900 sellers at MarketStar. What was your world at the end of February? And I'm kind of curious what the world looks like today and what you've had to do to adjust in this period.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, look, there's not. It probably doesn't surprise anybody listening in today that we've seen an increase of C-suite being involved in deals. Right, the world has changed in a lot of ways, but nobody really knew what was coming in March, April, May, June. Right, we were all in this. Well, what is this going to do to economies? What's it going to do to budgets? And there was a lot of tightening happening. So there was more scrutiny to budgets, right? We all face that of the realities of if this goes on, if this happens. So you started to create contingency plans. So that part doesn't surprise me a ton. I guess the interesting part for me is what we were all facing at that point, right? So if you think about MarketStar has a very small team for itself, meaning we go out and find new clients, but our sales force is for and on behalf of other clients, right? So you can think of major tech companies and ad and media companies. And so we were in this space where we had 900 employees that were in offices, and with all of those companies and the way that the data is today and the scrutiny around the security of that. We were in offices locked down, most of the time, clean desks, no phones, right? And so February, we were humming along with everybody pretty well in offices, besides a small portion of our team being field based. But when you think about kind of February shifting into March, we basically went 2 weeks wondering what was going to happen, and then within 3 weeks, moving all of our employees in-house or into their homes.
Yeah.
Right? So kitchen tables suddenly no longer held dinner; they held laptops and screens and microphones.
So you've got 900 people that have moved, plus your own sales team. Everybody's in their homes, yet we're seeing that we need to bring some of the best selling to the market that we've ever had, given that we have such an increase in executives joining these calls. What did you find? Did you find that the team was able to rise to this challenge and bring, that level of advanced selling that could sell to, as you can see here, CFOs and CTOs and CROs, significant increases in Q2 versus Q1?
Yeah, so you're shifting as well. You lose a little bit of that the beauty you have of sitting next to somebody, right, and listening to their call, that tribal knowledge that comes. And so you saw many companies shifting very quickly to technology. We were no different. So moving to where we were setting up face-to-face conversations via Zoom, right? So that we could see each other, not just hear each other, using other tools that are out there for learning and development. And then the increased pressure on managers to help them continue to listen to calls and know, where to specifically coach individuals. And, because now it's all on the manager. There's no kind of community that's necessarily sharing. And so, products where you could start to share wins, where you could start to share experiences. And so, seeing that email tools no longer were sufficient. So there were a number of tools that started to organically start to be used and in ways that they probably were designed at some point, but nobody had to use them in those ways. And so yes, we saw an increase in focus on those things versus it just happening organically.
How do you keep them connected? How do you keep it interesting? How do you share? How do you learn? What is that human connection? How are you achieving that in this work from home environment?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have, we're fortunate to have some pretty good leaders that think through this. But so when you think about products like, a Workplace or a Slack or those type of products, creating communities in there where chat could happen organically and where banter could happen the way it might happen in the office, that's one way. Doing fun things on Friday, I would open up meetings, and then my teams would subsequently open up meetings where there was no agenda, no topic. It was just a free flow. What are you facing? What's happening? Kids running in the background, everything else. But trying to create those environments where some of that connection and knowledge could be shared, for sure. And so one of the challenges was, when you're in an office, you can hear people calling and you can see them calling and you can see them emailing and you can see them doing their research. When you're away, you lose that. And so when you think about this, they have to not just improve their skills, but we have to also make sure they're efficient at the right times, because this group is also busy. You think about what this group is doing as well as trying to attend your call. They've probably just come off 6 other Zoom calls.
Yeah. I'm curious, Joel, we've seen a significant increase in CEOs joining the calls. How do you train your team to engage the CEO? What do you have to do different in these interactions?
Yeah, for the CEOs, it's important to understand, we all know a CEO, so it's important to understand what is relevant to that individual, but also that level, right? Similar to the marketing personas you saw out there, there is certainly a sales persona that can be built around each one of these. And so as you approach that, it's important to, in those communities and other ways that you're doing, identify what is remaining relevant to each one of these levels, because they'll each have an interest. And so for the CEO, it's important not to get necessarily into the tactical. And so we're teaching individuals how to ask the right questions to the team that surrounds the CEO to know what's important to them. But then when the CEO's on, it's important to let them talk and let them be heard for what's important to them, because this audience typically does not like to be told what they need. Hey, I hear what's important to you, but I don't think you really know what you want, right?
I mean, it's interesting. That data point is exactly what the data shows. As we look at all the different conversations out there, we need to let the CXOs talk more. When they talk 8.5% more, we win deals. And so that is one of the stats that we found. We also found that just asking the right questions to this group, so including 5 engaging questions by the rep to the CXO, these are the things that are progressing deals forward, to your point about just letting them talk.
Yeah, and I think the important part is asking questions, but not just random questions. So it's in the pre-work. It's understanding the pre-work includes, what are you seeing on their career sites? Because that will tell you where they're focused or where they have gaps. What is their team that surrounds them? What have they told you in the calls? And so as you do that, it's important to come in with a point of view, but more important that you have questions that are relevant to those points to then get their point of view. And then resist the urge to talk about things you haven't asked them a question about is an important thing.
Interesting. I'm curious then, in terms of it, you've got 900 sellers, ramping them up, enabling them to be ready for these conversations, especially now, onboarding people. How are you doing that? How's that different today than what you were doing before?
Yeah, again, ramping them up, you now it's more of a virtual buddy system, right? So you have subject matter experts, you have your top performers, and typically, especially in the higher level sales, so we sell all the way from the SMB entry level seller all the way up, right? So we have teams all the way through. But when you're in a more advanced environment, there's the typical training that you would have. There's the call shadowing, right? So in the beginning, it's pretty directive. So you pair them with mentors, and in the past, you'd sit them next to somebody, and they can ask questions and bounce questions. Where now it's you're trying to get them to schedule time in their day to meet with that person and review calls or do different things. The other thing that we found is, and this will continue even after, is to send them a certain amount of calls every day that you yourself find as, hey, that was a good one or that was a bad one. I'm going to send them an example of each. But also with a tool like Chorus, going in and the manager seeing calls that might need attention that they could review or that mentor could review. And so the next time they meet with that individual, they can work on some specific skill elevation. In the past, that tool existed, but it wasn't leveraged like it is today, if that makes sense.
I mean, it does. The data shows that we saw a 63% increase in managers taking these actions. But I find that the precision of coaching right now, down to specific minutes that the comments come in or the perfect snippets, it's exciting. I think we're seeing better coaching than when we used to walk the halls and say, great job on that call. It's just far more precise, and new reps onboarding are saying, look, I can listen and find those specific objections and be back on the field in a week. It's a different motion, which is quite exciting. I wanted to get your perspective, Joel, on win rates. And what our data shows is that we have a 38% increase in win rates when the C-suite's involved. So that, no surprise there. The question is, should we have the C-suite involved in every deal?
What I would say is it depends, right? It depends. And so the challenge is, are you going to be more successful if you can have that person in there? Yeah, right. The answer is yes. It's pretty definitive. But do they always need to be involved? So a more interesting question is, once the C-suite is involved, how does it distend or extend the sales cycle, right? So what happens to the sales cycle is another thing. And so if you have a rather short sales cycle, or if you're in educational sales where you're selling these big, large deals into education, you only have a certain amount of harvest time. So if you get too many parties involved and you miss the harvest time, then you've obviously missed that opportunity. And so I hate to sound like an attorney on the call, but it truly depends. But if your product needs to be implemented at the highest levels, and the highest levels need to be engaged in using the product, then I would say it's absolutely essential to get them involved at some point in the sale. I'll give you an example. Workplace by Facebook. It's a product that goes through the whole organization. And if your executive level isn't engaged in using it, then likely the tool kind of dies and becomes this skunk work project of somebody that, or some team that uses it. Slack, very similar, right? Slack is a great product, but if everybody's not engaged in that product, then you're still stuck sending an email and an iMessage and a Slack message to 5 different groups. And so in those cases where the product needs and fits and impacts, then yes, right? You need to have the C-level engaged.
Knowing that we're seeing the C-suite involved more, what advice would you have for sellers where they're working with an economic buyer who might not be in the C-suite, senior level, but not quite at the top? And knowing that they're in competitive situations, and competition's always going to be playing that. How do we get our economic buyers to bring the C-suite in, knowing that we need to cover all those bases?
So people aren't dumb. They know what your motive is. And so I always tell people, you have to reframe. Are you trying to sell that person, or are you trying to get them the solution that they need to make their life better? And if you shift and reframe your thinking to, this individual, we're trying to make their life better, so I'm a partner in this. And in order to do that, I have to help them sell the next level and ease that burden for them. Then it becomes a process of, let's work together to get what you want, and let me be a partner in this to help you get there. So let's talk through what you need to enable the next conversation, so that you're not having to do another side job just trying to build a case for this. I want to be a partner in this. So if you take that approach of, how do we partner together to not make this a part-time job for you to be able to build a case for a tool and a product that you need. The close is just helping them understand they need it.
Yeah.
But that's not going to get you the deal.
I mean, it's fascinating when you look at, we've all worked with so many different remarkable sales professionals. We've got sales background as well, but it does seem like there's 2 styles. There's the style that's very polished, that drives the process, but doesn't quite feel comfortable, really partnering, where you get on the same level as the individual. You're still kind of waiting to hear back. And then there's those that are on the text messaging where they've teamed up. It's a team sport to go win this deal internally. Do you see those 2 different perspectives? Both can be successful in different ways, but that ability to just be so confident, to be able to really partner and get in with that economic buyer, it's a different motion. And I don't see that everybody has that.
Yeah, and what I've found is, if you can get somebody that's comfortable with a process or a framework, they don't necessarily have to be entirely confident or arrogant in themselves, right? A lot of times we see this just amazing, just people connector, and they're loud and they talk really well, and they just make you feel like, well, gosh, I probably should do this because, wow, this is good. And then there's the quiet. And what I've found is those that, especially in a C-suite type sell, those that truly view themselves as a consultant type mentality where it's ask, listen, clarify, listen, ask.
Yeah.
And then they're poised enough to step back and really build the solution around what they heard versus what they're trying to sell. In more of an enterprise or C-level, that's really what I've seen, kind of the personality. So you're kind of talking about two different approaches, but what I would say is the process by which they get there is as important as the individual that's on the deal, right?
Yep. I mean, I think, yeah. And I think that, to your point, the frameworks, is what's the scalable piece there as well.
Yeah.
One other stat that I wanted to show, last stat that I wanted to kind of pull up, was just looking at, on average, the time spent in decks and demos. We find that when economic buyers, when the C-level's involved, there's a 42%, increase in them seeing, this content. So on the left side, you have, the percentage of meetings with decks and demos by role, and on the right side, the time spent in these. And it just gives you, a little bit of perspective that demos are definitely driving it. People like to get this group in and get them into a demo. A little bit of deck, but far more demo. Is this consistent with how your team is selling?
Yeah, so when you think about it, we talked about frameworks. So we kind of have this prospect, right? Prospect and gather information. Then you go in and you engage the audience to find out what the interest really is through this needs analysis, right? So you're asking questions. You don't talk during that time. And that might be an entire call where it's, hey, the expectation is I'm not going to say much. I just want to better understand the challenges you have. And the reason that becomes so powerful is because then you can come back with a recommendation that specifically is focused around demonstrating how that solves the specific needs they brought up. And it's kind of that recommend, demonstrate stage. And a lot of people confuse that. So they want to show how their product just fits in magically. Yeah. And have that be the talk track. And that's where you typically, the danger in the deck, the pre-canned deck, versus really kind of going back and saying, okay, what did they talk about that was important? Let's show this, and then let's do a demonstration rather than just a static slide. And so anytime you can do that and have it be relevant to the audience, that becomes much more powerful in our experience.
Love it. Very, very customized. Joel, final question. When are we all getting back to the office?
I don't know. We are slowly getting back there now. We have some of our leadership in there, and then special cases where, something crazy has happened, like a windstorm's knocked out power and internet and everything else, where people can get permission to come in, but it's a very different environment. We talked about it, a little bit in a prior conversation, but you're in there in masks and gloves and 6 people in a conference room that had 20 in the past, and you lose kind of some of that connection. Facial expressions are a big part of how we communicate and how we connect, and you lose that. And so I imagine you'll start to see some of that happen over the next few months. But when we get into the office environment that we remember, where we can actually see people's faces, I would guess maybe next year sometime.
Are you getting face-to-face time with any of your team members, maybe outside the office, or walks and so forth?
Yeah, in small doses and small groups. No, we haven't gotten together in a group of more than about 6, and that's outdoor golf scramble, no more than 2 in a cart. Stay spread apart type of deal, but that's about it.
Yeah, I had one of our leaders over to my house last night, which is not the way we used to operate, but the ability to sit outside, but to spend 2 to 3 hours, just chatting and talking. It's a very different experience than the type of conversation, that looser conversation that you're using in these more focused, Zoom sessions.
Yeah, for sure. It's always an interesting deal. So I am excited for the time we can all, for me, hop on a bike and climb up a mountain and see a big group of us there. So
Love it. Love it.
solo rides are not near as much fun.
Amen. I'm looking forward to getting back out running with the group. So, hey,
There you
Joel,
go.
appreciate taking the time today. Thanks for kicking off with us, sharing these insights on the C-suite. And for those listening, you can access all this data at Chorus.ai and just click on the weekly briefing. Joel, have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, cheers.
Talk to you.